I am delighted to welcome Dasiy Hernadez to the main stage, who is the SVP of Strategy and Operations at Zuora. Dasiy brings over 20 years of enterprise software experience. She spent the last decade at SAP, most recently serving as the Global President of Product. There, she led a global cross-functional organization where she was responsible for driving business growth by creating verticalized solutions and enabling marketing and sales through multiple routes to market.
So when I joined Zuora, it was because I was inspired by the vision of creating a world subscribed. So for those not familiar with Zuora, Zuora is a thought leader in the subscription economy. Our mission is to help companies launch, build, and grow their subscription businesses. And it was a fast growing company, and we had to change the way that we work in order to unlock the next phase of our growth. Sound familiar, I'm sure. And I was intrigued with this notion of partnering with the executive committee to figure out how do we actually unlock our next phase of growth? Because typically what that means is we have to grow and also change the way that we work because we had to scale. It's definitely not the size of SAP from where I've come from, but 1,300 employees across 15 offices worldwide. You can just imagine how difficult it can be to enact synchronized change, is how I'd like to call it. And so thankfully, Teen Zo, who is our CEO and co-founder, met with Deirdre Pagnad, and our CEOs got together and they started to strategize how could WorkBoard help. And definitely it was a good time to do it because, as you would imagine, we not only needed to make progress against our growth strategy, and we needed to do that and change how we operate. But as it turned out, we were also going to do this in the middle of an unexpected global pandemic. And as I said, hindsight is always 2020, but thank goodness it happened when it did, because it definitely helped us through those challenges. So in terms of the challenges that that I observed coming in, and also just hearing when I had first joined, like most companies that are in hyperscale growth, no surprise, they start to get critical mass in their different areas, whether it be a region or business function. And what we saw was people started to work in silos. Reason is because the bigger you get, your existing communication processes get challenged and stressed. Your existing way of doing work just doesn't work anymore. So there's definitely are we on the same page situation in terms of, are we working towards the same thing? So first and foremost, working in silos, and we definitely needed to drive some strategic alignment. The other challenge that we were seeing was competing priorities. Naturally, if you are working in silos, you tend to have different set of priorities. And also, like most companies, we wanted to achieve so much more than what our capacity is, right? Everyone hear about, the top priorities, like what's not a top priority. So what was really important is, did we have laser focus on the right priorities at the right time? Yes, all the priorities are important, but can we sequence them and work together on the same thing so that we can actually get some of the strategic imperatives done? And what's also most important is making sure that our company, our employees, feel really connected to the work that they're doing. If you don't have strategic alignment, there's too many competing priorities, we're working so hard, but does it really matter? Now you have employees that just feel disengaged. And so how do we make sure that we're all operating and flying in formation such that our employees feel like whatever they are doing, we spend so much time at work, whatever we are doing, it's contributing to the right things. And I know that I am working in concert with everybody else in order to make that happen. So what I wanted to go through was, each of these areas and what were the lessons learned, what was the situation, kind of share a little bit of more detail about our story. So first and foremost was strategic alignment. When I joined, it was very clear vision. world subscribed, very clear mission. We're all working towards making sure that the best companies in the world can grow their subscription businesses. They come to us not only for our technology, but they come to us for guidance. But one key piece that was not clear was the strategy, the corporate strategy. And that was something that I spent a majority of my time when I first started at Zuora, working with the executive committee and working with team to make sure, like, are we all aligned and on the same page as far as what our strategy is? We know that we want to shift from the small, medium business segment to the enterprise segment. We know in order to do that, there's some different things that we have to do differently. Are we saying the same things across the company so that people understand how they align to that? So we painted, this picture of what is our vision, mission, strategy, and also how that aligns to our corporate objectives. And this was a really key piece on making sure that, again, that we had alignment on the most important goals. What was interesting about this was we rolled out our corporate strategy in February. And if people remember, March was about when most of the companies started to go in shelter in place. So thank goodness we had done that. And it has been our guiding light throughout the last, coming now on a year and a quarter. But this was really key in order for us to really understand, how do we make sure that we are writing out the objectives that are going to matter and make sense to the employees and to the business area so that they know how they line up to that. So the next area was around focused execution. So earlier I talked about how getting stuff done was not the challenge for Zuora, but how do we make sure that we are focused on the right things and at the right time? And we use our objectives and key results to focus primarily on what will grow and optimize the business. And so we spent the first couple of quarters just challenging some of the objectives and key results that people were setting for themselves. Why? Because what I like to call run the business, so the things that we already know how to do, they're easier because we're used to doing them. But it's running the business, meaning that we're not pushing ourselves or pushing towards any kind of change. And change is hard, and so are doing new things. And so one of the things that we made sure is, are these objectives and key results really focused on what will grow and optimize the business? That was first and foremost. And secondly, how do we make sure that it is also aligned to our strategy? So part of our process when we are setting and also doing the retro reset for our OKRs is that we reiterate what the strategy is. Because as I mentioned, one of the things, earlier was that it wasn't clear that there was a shared understanding of what our strategy is. So we would always reiterate it because one of the most important things is that the more that you repeat, the more people remember. And what we were finding was that that was really key for people to realize, oh, we're not changing the strategy. This is actually our strategy. We're really going to do this. And as I said, hindsight's 2020, thank goodness that was in place, because that was the stabilizing force to get us through a pretty difficult time in terms of, not really knowing what to expect in terms of the world and life and everything else. But in terms of what we're doing at the company, just making sure that we were laser focused on our strategy, making sure that people were translating it. Another interesting tidbit in terms of lessons learned was, as we were going through this process, people were like, oh, OKRs is just another 3-letter acronym. And for those of us in this industry, we all know about TLAs. And what was happening was, it was almost like saying the term OKR was, there's this cognitive dissonance of it's overly structured, it's overly processed, I don't know what it means. And so I was like, okay, well, let's take a step back, right? Let's talk about our strategy, right? What do we need to do in order to drive it? What are the things that we want to accomplish? What do you think we can accomplish this year? And how do we know that we've made any kind of progress on that? Okay, great. Well, now, how do you break that down into the work that you need to do? And it was interesting to see how just putting it in layman's terms, for those that were not familiar with OKRs, all of a sudden now they're coming up with all these business outcomes and everything else. And then, after they go through that, then you say, by the way, these are actually OKRs. But that was just another interesting observation that I found, is that, going back to behavioral and cultural change, just even language, right, is part of culture. Even language is extremely important to be mindful of. So when I think about one of the examples that come to mind in terms of how we made sure that we had, focused on the right things and at the right time, is that one of the 4 corporate strategic pillars is around alliances. If we had the strategic imperative to move towards the enterprise segment, in order for us to do that, we have to have a healthy, thriving, growing ecosystem of partners. And so in order to do that, we needed to make sure that we were building out our alliances, and primarily initially focusing on global system integrators. Otherwise, here, another TLA, GSI. Why is that important? Because there are many different kinds of partners. You have, OEM partners, you have ISV partners, or, different kinds of integrated solution vendors. But we knew that our first area that we wanted to focus on was really around our global system integrators. Why? Because they are at our customers as the strategic partners in order for them to implement our solution, especially in the context of a customer's already existing landscape. And so one of the things that we had talked about is, well, what does it mean to, build alliances? And we talked about, how do we take a look at our strategy? Again, what makes sense in terms of how we create the right signals and what we write in our objective, because we're trying to mobilize, multiple teams to rally around, this change. And so we were very meticulous, sometimes a little too much, on how do we write this objective such that people understood what they needed to go do. It doesn't take the place of the conversations, but if this is something that we are going to keep repeating over and over again, right? How do we make sure that people really understand what that means? And then how do we make sure that we're finding the right business outcomes so that it's not just we're doing a lot of work and not really getting to where we need to go? And so happy to say that a year later, it's actually part of our earnings, which we just had yesterday, of where we talk about how many of our projects are actually taken on by global system integrators. And I didn't realize how the magnitude or significance of that until, because I had only been, at Zuora for, a year at the time. But a longtime employee who had been there for 6 years, when we were going through our all hands and showing like the things that we're doing and accomplishing with our OKRs, he says, Dasiy, I have to say, I am pleasantly surprised by how many global system integrators we have and how many of our projects are actually taking. I said, well, what do you mean by that? It's like, well, because we've talked about this for some time, but it's nice to see that it's actually happening. And so those are also the stories that you use to then also help drive and promote the use of OKRs. And I just remember that any teams that were a little skeptical, all of a sudden it's like, oh man, I need to use these OKRs because it's going to actually help me move the needle on the things that I need to be successful in. And so again, focused execution was extremely important for us in terms of why we chose to roll out an OKR system. And then ultimately it's about engaged employees, right? So in a time of transformation, in a time of change, how do we make sure that the work that they are doing aligns to the objectives of the company, how we're measuring success, how it actually progresses our corporate strategy, and ultimately, how do we have happy and engaged employees along with happy and engaged customers? And that's where like the magic happens. And how we went about doing this is that when I started, one of the things that I looked at, so I define OKR system as people, process, tools, like probably many of you. And for the people part, what setup do we have to have in order for us to drive the right kind of change? Because adopting a new system and changing the way we work is definitely more than, rolling out, any kind of tool. And we wanted to make sure that, people understood how to use a tool. Otherwise you have garbage in, garbage out. So I was asked, hey, Dasiy, are you going to have people on your team, meaning people directly reporting to me, like helping like drive the OKR system? And I said, I don't think that's really going to work. And they did have OKR leads here that were like named when I first started. But it was pretty clear that at least the interpretation of that was they were super WorkBoard admins. And that means that the lion's share of actually caring about, the OKRs themselves was really going to be on a small set of people, small group of people. And it wasn't really going to be as transformational as we want it to be across 1,300. And so one of the things I decided to do was, okay, let's take a step back. And if we are going to have, these OKR leads, what is it that we need them to actually like do when it comes to driving OKRs through the company? So first thing I did was, and it may have been something silly and simple, but I was like, well, I want to make sure that they are OKR leaders. And that was important because for me, the distinction was leads they're the go-to people to help answer your questions. And they, tell you, how to go about creating OKRs and things like that. I'm like, no, I want leaders. I want people who are expected to understand the strategy, how it translates to their business areas, and have the visibility and the influence to drive everything that we need to when it came to the OKR system. Like, are they aligned on the principles and why we are doing this? And are they situated in the business areas such that they can help permeate and drive that change across their areas?